This is the Fengda Airbrush and Compressor Kit, and in this video, we're going to see if it's good for first-time airbrushes. I'm Dave, let's get into it. What goodies do we get in the box? We get a compressor, a tank, a pressure regulator, a pressure gauge, a moisture trap, a hose, an airbrush, a pipette, cleaning brushes, and 5 different airbrush paints. I've been using this kit for a couple of months now, and there's some things I dislike about it and some things I like about it. So I'm going to start with the things I dislike about it and end in a positive note. So the first thing I dislike about it are the cleaning brushes. They're a little bit thick, so they're hard to actually get into the airbrush for cleaning. They are metal, which means that the end is quite scratchy, so you're like risking scratching up your airbrush when you use them. And also the bristles can come out, and if they come out inside the airbrush, then they could cause a clog. So I've found that I don't really use them anymore. And that's actually all I really dislike about this airbrush kit, which is lucky because my friends actually bought this kit for me for my birthday. So let's get into the things I do like about the kit. So the first one is the compressor and the tank. So the compressor squeezes the air, just like what you do between your butt cheeks. And then once it's compressed the air, it stores it in the tank. The good thing about this is with the tank, it acts as a buffer. So the air in the tank is always pressurized. So you're always going to get a smooth flow of air. The other thing it does is because there's a tank, the compressor doesn't have to be on all the time, which means when it's off, it can actually cool down a bit and not build up heat as you use it more and more. Have noticed even with the tank, the compressor can get quite hot after a while. There is a version of this kit that doesn't come with a tank, and I'm glad that I do have the version with the tank. The next thing I like is the pressure regulator and pressure gauge. So the regulator is really easy to use. It's just a giant knob which you can twist. And then you have the pressure gauge there, which lets you see what pressure you're using when you're spraying with the airbrush. And that's really helpful when looking at guides and videos online, because they always say like use this PSI or that PSI. The only tiny issue I have with the pressure gauge is it's fixed to the compressor, which means since I have my compressor on the floor, I do have to lean over to actually see what pressure I'm using. Now the next few things I'm going to bunch together, and that is the moisture trap, the hose, the airbrush holder, and the pipette. All I can say about them is they all work. The moisture trap keeps moisture out of the air in the hose that goes through to your airbrush. The holder holds the airbrush, and the pipette works well for transferring varnish and my airbrush cleaner in and out of my airbrush. If you're liking this video, then please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want more tips on miniature painting. So when I'm talking about the airbrush, keep in mind that this is the first time I've had an airbrush. I'm not an experienced user. So with the airbrush, I've found it to be completely fine to use. I've been using it for priming, using it for base coats, for doing color gradients, and for doing varnishing, which I think is probably what most people want to do when they first get an airbrush as well. Now, the thing I like about it is that I'm not afraid to strip it down and clean it. If I had started out with one of those expensive Iwata or Harder and Steenbeck airbrushes, I think I would have been a bit scared to actually get in there, take it apart, and figure out what's happening. So yeah, obviously I still get blockages and issues with the airbrush, but as far as I have figured out, they've all been user issues. So usually my paint consistency is wrong, my air pressure is wrong, I haven't cleaned my airbrush properly, but those are all me issues. They're not really issues with the airbrush. I'm sure it's not a perfect airbrush, and one thing I've noticed is it uses little rubber O-rings, which those O-rings will eventually wear out. But at that point, I'm probably gonna feel like upgrading to a nicer airbrush. You might have noticed that my airbrush looks a little bit funny. That's because I've modified it a bit. That's not really a knock on this airbrush. It's the issue I have with all the airbrushes I've seen. I just don't find them super comfortable or easy to grip. So if you want to see how I made these changes, then check out the video linked above. Finally, the airbrush paints. I didn't really think much of them when I first saw them, but they have actually been pretty useful. They're like pretty nice standard colors, so I found them quite a lot of uses to mix them into some of my other colors. And the good thing is they're already pre-thinned to sort of an airbrush consistency. So that gives me a good idea of how much I want to thin my paints. And I've actually found them to be the easiest paints to use through my airbrush, because I don't have any specific airbrush paints apart from these. I mostly have Citadel and Army Painter paints, which are like standard sort of thickness, and I'm thinning them down myself, which sometimes I overdo it or I underdo it. So these airbrush paints have actually been pretty useful for me. Overall, I think it's a really nice kit. I definitely think the compressor, tank, pressure regulator section of it is probably the best part, because I think that will last me a really long time, since the tank lets the compressor cool down. So hopefully it will have a nice long life. And I think eventually when the airbrush packs it in, then I'll upgrade to a slightly nicer one. But for the moment, for everything I'm using it for, it's been perfectly fine. Something else you might need when you're first getting an airbrush is an airbrush spray booth, so that you can keep all the overspray contained within the booth and not get around your room. If you're interested to see how well they work, then I have a video linked here that shows you as I burn some incense and see how well it sucks all that incense smoke in. Thanks for watching. Cheers.